welcome to the Panthers Show by Sports CLT. My name is Dylan Jackson. Today, we're going to be covering the Carolina Panthers 2026 schedule. Today, as always on the Panthers Show, I'm joined by Jacob LeQuire. Jacob, how's it going?
It's going well. Really hot in Charlotte is what I'll say. So I'm happy to be doing evening pods as opposed to something in the day or in the morning or something.
It's summertime. It's summertime. It's getting up to 90 degrees in Charlotte now. So quite the weather. I don't know about you, but it's always those early September games in Charlotte that are really rough to go to in person. It's just so steamy. I was at the Texans game in 2015, the Super Bowl year.
Oh yeah,
where it was hot. It was like 95 degrees that day, and it was I think the longest game ever in regulation. Like it didn't go to overtime or anything, just by like minutes of game length. So that was a really rough one to go to. I don't think I've been to a September NFL game since then. Have you been to any like super hot or super cold games?
I've been to a couple cold ones where you want to sit in the sun. The ones you're talking about, you want to avoid the sun. You want to sit on the team sideline. I'll say the hottest thing I've been to football related is when Carolina used to have their training practices in Wofford. And I went to one of those, and you're like sitting, it's in a depressed area, is where the football fields are. You're sitting on a hill that the sun just stares into. And it's like a swamp, as you know, as a South Carolinian. So it was that was rough, but nothing like an early September game. I can't remember for a Panthers game.
I'm actually like I completely blanked on it. I did go to the Atlanta game this past year in Charlotte,
Week 3.
which was in September. 30-0. It was not that hot outside. It was still really hot. It just wasn't as hot as it potentially could have been. So,
Well, and you could have left by the third quarter.
oh yeah,
Like, that game was over.
yeah. And it's funny because I specifically tried to get seats in the shade based on what I knew about the stadium, and then we were just in the sun the whole time anyway, with the shadow of the stadium right behind us. So that was fun. But let's get into talking some actual September football. We're just going to go one by one, week by week down the schedule. And week 1, the Carolina Panthers are going to open against the Chicago Bears at home. So this is a game where you have the obvious number 1 overall pick storyline, with Caleb Williams being the product of a Carolina Panthers trade to the first overall pick. You have Bryce Young, another result of that trade. You have so many different storylines. What do you make of the opening game of the Carolina Panthers season?
I like it. Like, you got to get out to the good games and the tougher games early. I think it'll be a good challenge. What I'm looking at for Chicago is they obviously had a phenomenal season last year. I think they were 11-6 last year, but they started off the season kind of slow, kind of like Carolina did. And one of their key factors last season, the Bears I'm talking about, was their offensive line. I would say their offensive line was their best unit across the entire team. Well, their center, Drew Dahlman, who played at a Pro Bowl level, he retired right before the draft, and they replaced him with, I believe, Garrett Bradbury from the Patriots, formerly a Minnesota Viking. That's going to be quite the downgrade, in my opinion. Left tackle Ozzie Trapillo is still dealing with injury. So if their offensive line isn't up to snuff in week 1, I think Carolina actually has a chance in this one, despite what odds might say.
And this is a Bears team that really struggled the beginning of last year, specifically. I think it's really difficult. I wouldn't say difficult, but it's more difficult for offensive play callers to get going earlier in the year as opposed to defensive guys, where you're still kind of figuring things out on that end of the field. So I think that it's probably preferable to have a guy like Ben Johnson come into Charlotte week 1 versus week 10 or 16 later in the season. So I actually like the fact that you just go ahead and get it over with week 1 in Charlotte. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and not only were they it took them a while to get going early in the season, it took the Bears a while to get going in games throughout the year last year. They were not a first quarter team by any means. So if this is another hot, steamy Carolina September game that we're talking about, where a team coming from Chicago might not be used to that heat, I think Carolina can take advantage, especially with the defensive additions, like you mentioned. I think Giro Vero is going to have a field day throwing Jalen Phillips and Devin Lloyd out there. to mess with offensive guys early in the year.
It's going to be a fun game to really take note of what those players look like in their first game as Panthers. Do you think that week one you're going to see, let's just say, Monroe Freeling start at left tackle?
I think so. They I don't think they would have drafted him at 19 to not have him there. And
It's a good
one thing
matchup for that
it
too.
is that's what I was gonna say is if you recall 4 years ago, Ike Ekwonu's very first game was against Miles Garrett. That's probably the worst ever matchup you could have as a left tackle in your first game. That'll be like I think week 3. We play the Browns this year, but I think Montez Sweat, Dio Dengbo, Austin Booker is another edge rusher that the Bears have. I think that's much more favorable than having to deal with Miles Garrett or Trey Hendrickson, who's somebody later in the year.
Let's go ahead and get to week two. This is a game that has a little bit of interest in it because we don't really know what the quarterback situation is going to look like for this team in week two. It's the Atlanta Falcons. It's another game on the road against Atlanta. Bryce Young's seen a lot of success on the road in Atlanta specifically. The Atlanta Falcons didn't really do much. They didn't have the capability to do much this past offseason. They signed Tua Tagovailoa. Their biggest draft pick this past year is Avion Terrell, the brother of their other premier corner, uh, AJ Terrell. So they didn't really do all that much. I think that it should be a game that's very winnable for the Carolina Panthers. I'm not sure. Division games are always going to be tough, and that game in Atlanta last year was super close overtime. There's an argument to be made if Michael Penix never got hurt in that game, the Panthers probably don't win that game. So I have to think that this will be a competitive game, despite the fact that Atlanta's probably going to see some regression on their roster from this past season.
Will this be the first time we see a full first and last name on someone's jersey with AJ Terrell?
It could be.
Could be. Yeah, because Aviance are you're gonna have to have 2 letters because they share the same first letter, but jokes aside, looking at their roster changes, obviously they have a new head coach, Kevin Stefanski, who I think was at a disadvantage with his quarterback situation. Part of that was his own doing in Cleveland, but this isn't much better of a quarterback situation. I don't know who the starter is going to be between Penix or Tagovailoa. Either way, Bryce Young and the Panthers were 3-0 against those guys last year. And even though this is a road division game, we heard Bryce say that when he got benched to clear his mind, he drove to Atlanta because that was like his fortress of solitude because he just absolutely annihilates teams in that stadium. So I think this is a good advantage for Carolina to have the Falcons early in the year because you could get a road division win early as opposed to later in the season.
And it's another favorable game in week three against the Cleveland Browns. They're going on the road to Cleveland. And you mentioned it in your preview article for Sports CLT with the new Carolina Panthers schedule. But 4 years ago, Ike Ekwonu's first career game was against Miles Garrett.
Mm.
There's another game against Miles Garrett 4 years later where you could potentially see Monroe Freeling really struggle in a matchup against the league's best defensive player. It's going to be a tough matchup. I think that Cleveland's going to have some real issues at quarterback. We don't really know what they're going to do at that position, so they're not going to be that good of a team this year. I think that's pretty clear. It's probably going to be Deshaun Watson. The entire offensive line is new. Most of the receiving core is new. It's going to be very, very different looking of a team under head coach Todd Monken. I'm excited to see what they look like, even if it's like Shedeur Sanders for 7 or 8 games. I love Casey Concepcion. I like Denzel Boston. Do you think there's a realistic chance the Panthers drop this one to Cleveland?
I think there is. If I had to pick a trap game on the schedule, which is tough because Carolina is currently only favored in 3 games, which is a little bit of disrespect, but I think it would be the Cleveland Browns. Yes, they over the past couple of years they've been a really bad team, right? But I think they've done a phenomenal job at retooling their roster around where whoever the quarterback is. The quarterback play is not going to be good, I wouldn't think, but if Todd Monken can supplement that with a lot of talented receivers, you have some rookies last year like Harold Fannin, Quinshon Judkins, who are good tertiary options, secondary options for the offense. This one could be a trap game, so to speak, but it's going to come down to Miles Garrett and Monroe Freeling. What I will say is, I think Freeling is much more equipped to handle the pass rush of Garrett as opposed to Aquanu was in his inaugural game as a rookie. Aquanu really struggled with outside rushes, even in college. There was talk about him being moved into guard. So that was a tough game for Icky. First go around, 2 sacks, I think a handful of pressures. Hopefully, it'll be better for Freeling if he ends up starting.
Week 4 is another really exciting one. It's Sunday Night Football in Charlotte against the Detroit Lions. What are your initial thoughts on seeing? We'll just say this game because we'll get to the other two primetime games a little bit later. But what were your thoughts on seeing a home Sunday Night Football game early on in the schedule?
The last time Carolina hosted a Sunday night football game, I was a senior in high school. We're going back to the Super Bowl run, and it was they hosted the Eagles, I believe, and won
Wow,
27-16.
that's right.
The following year, they were on Sunday Night Football as well, but it was in Seattle, and Carolina got fried in that one. So hopefully, it's more like the Super Bowl year. It's awesome. I think the Panthers are finally being rewarded for having some relevance. You have to win to become relevant. And not only are we getting 3 primetime games this year for the Panthers, it's one of each, right? So having a Sunday night football game at home this early in the season, you got to love it.
You were a senior in high school that
Mhm.
year. I was a eighth grader that year. So yeah, it's been quite a while since we've seen the Carolina Panthers in Charlotte on Sunday Night Football. They had a home Monday night game Bryce's rookie year.
Mhm.
That was kind of a weird one because it was a doubleheader from ESPN. That was week 2 actually against the Saints. I was there. It was not a pretty game. Thanks Frank Reich, but I think
Mhm.
this game it's probably going to end up in the loss column. The Lions really struggled this past year, but they still had a better record than Carolina. Still at a top near 5 defense or offense. I mean, top half the league defense. Aiden Hutchinson still a pretty ridiculous player. It's going to be hard to really match the ability of this Lions team, but it is football. Anything's possible. After that, you've got a bye week. What are your thoughts on just having an early bye week? Do you see it as an advantage, a disadvantage? Is it kind of annoying to you?
The last 2 out of the 3 there, I think it is a disadvantage. It's very annoying considering this is a team that ideally should be looking for a playoff push, and to have to play, would it be 13 straight regular season games after the bye and then into the playoffs? That's a bit of a disadvantage. The one thing I will say is that, and Dave Canales alluded to this recently in a press conference, if you have players that start the season on IR or PUP, they have to wait 4 weeks to be activated, if it's prior to the season, and if you have an extra rest week for those players to get reacclimated to game speed, that can be an advantage, like, if you suffer a minor injury in the offseason or training camp. Other than that, I'm not a huge fan. At least you're getting it after the primetime game, so if it goes poorly, you get a full 2 weeks to go over it and recuperate before a road game, but overall, I'm not a huge fan of it.
Yeah, I think if it does go poorly on Sunday night, it's almost more of a double like negative effect where you're just stuck with that taste in your mouth for 2 whole weeks, you know?
Mhm.
I do think it's really beneficial going into week 6 though against Philadelphia Eagles in Philadelphia where the Eagles play in the United Kingdom the week before. It is that's a tough thing to do to go all the way to England and come back without a bye week. So the Panthers, it's almost like a double rest advantage in a way. I think it's going to be a tough game regardless against Philadelphia on the road. It's a harsh environment to play in. The Panthers might be getting some sort of relief in about 10 days with a potential AJ Brown trade, but it's going to be a tough game. The Panthers do have a rest advantage, which I do appreciate having after an early bye week.
This is where I'll call it the gauntlet of the season starts between week 6 and 13, in my opinion. And it's a tough one, right? The Eagles are, despite them maybe not having a Super Bowl season last year, they're still a very good roster. Howie Roseman continually replenishes talent for the Eagles team. And whatever you think of Jalen Hurts, he's still a good athlete and an NFL starting quarterback. I will say the last time Carolina faced the Eagles, uh, Evero's defense did make it tough for them. And this was a year where Saquon Barkley rushed for 2,000 yards, and it was a close game. Carolina could have pulled it off there down the stretch. Um, the Panthers are better at this point, so I think it'll still be a close game, even with the rest advantage. But ultimately, Philly's just a good team, man.
They're really good. And it's almost like Philly has a disappointing year in between their really, really good seasons as well.
Hmm.
I'm not saying that that's a trend that could continue here, but they definitely, I think, got better despite possibly losing AJ Brown. Like they added Makai Lemon, they added Jonathan Grenard, Reek Woolen. Um, those are really quality players. Even though they lost Jalen Phillips, they're going to lose AJ Brown. They're just a team that continually reloads. I actually like this game as a pretty close win in mid-October with the rest advantage. I think that Ejiro Evero is pretty locked in on quarterbacks that are less capable of throwing over the middle of the field. He's kind of tuned into being able to stop those quarterbacks a little bit more efficiently. If you remember 2 years ago when the Panthers really struggled at the beginning of the 2024 season, they probably should have beaten the Philadelphia Eagles in Philadelphia if Xavier Legette just catches a simple touchdown pass over the shoulder. That probably should have happened. It didn't. It is what it is. But I do think that the Panthers have the talent to match Philadelphia, especially if the quarterback isn't going to give them what they want.
The path is there for sure. If I had to pick an upset where the Panthers are underdogs by 3 or more, it would be this Philadelphia game with all those thoughts considered. Hopefully, we're not going to be dealing with AJ Brown next year, but you never know. Sometimes trades fall apart.
So the week after that, Carolina returns home and they play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 1 p.m. What do you make of this Tampa team? It was kind of a weird offseason from them. I think Ruben Bain falling to, what was it, the 15th overall pick kind of saved a lot of what they did this offseason. What do you make of the Bucks, and do you think this is a winnable game at home?
I've gone back and forth between how I view the Buccaneers this offseason. On the one hand, they were a 6-2 team before everything spiraled, but then everything did spiral. Baker didn't play great in the second half of last year. On the other hand, they improved the defense a ton in free agency and in the draft. But on the offensive side of the ball, they brought in Zach Robinson, who was last known as the Atlanta Falcons offensive coordinator, who I would say he did not maximize the skill talent in Atlanta, and they lose Mike Evans. So I've gone back and forth. I'm kind of looking at the Bucks like they'll be around where they were last year, and given that this is a home game, it's absolutely winnable. And I would go as far to say as this should be a must-win game within this stretch here of 8 games where you only have 3 at home, and the other 2 at home are against the Denver Broncos and the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, I mean, the next week, right after that, it's a Thursday night game in Green Bay. That is, it's just not a combination that a lot of teams walk away from with the win. This team is going to return Micah Parsons. I really like their receiving core, even without Dontavion Wicks. They have Matthew Golden, who should be much better this year than he was last year. They lost Romeo Dobbs. That sucks. But Christian Watson was kind of just their best receiver anyway this past year. I really like Green Bay going into this year. I think that they were much better than their 9-7-1 record showed. Even if they didn't add a ton, whether it was through the draft, they didn't have a first round pick, or really nobody major in free agency. This is just a really talented team. I think Jordan Love led the NFL in EPA per pass attempt this past year, if I'm not mistaken. Like, very, very good quarterback. They have one of the best defenders in all of football. He's always killed the Panthers too. Micah Parsons, I feel like he always gets 2 or 3 sacks against us. So it's really difficult to see Carolina walking away with a win.
The one thing I will say is last season, Carolina went into Lambeau and walked away with the win.
They did.
And this is in October, not like December for Lambeau. So I don't think we're going to be dealing with a ton of cold weather stuff, even though I don't think that's a huge issue for Bryce Younger. It hasn't been so far. His issue is just more like consistency. This could be a win for Carolina, but it's tough. having a short week going into Lambeau. This is like the second or third furthest game away for Carolina this year. It's going to be rough. And it's going to be a national game too. So if it's bad, it's going to sting even more.
Thursday night games are always just very sloppy, especially if you're the away team. Add in the fact that it's Lambeau Field. It's just, I think that this might be the most unwinnable game on the entire schedule. It's just a really rough combination. But another really tough one, you mentioned just this stretch of games being a gauntlet. They play the Denver Broncos at home in week 9. The Broncos finished 14-3 this past year. They hosted the AFC Championship game. Probably would have won had their quarterback played, and really like that team didn't get snowed out in the fourth quarter basically. But they add Jalen Waddle, they add a few rookies later on in the draft. The Panthers have a 3-day rest advantage. This will be a game at home, Denver coming across the country, but it's still a rough matchup. Denver is very, very good. They had what I considered to be the best defense in the NFL last year, even if the metrics didn't quite match up with that. Bo Nix, we'll see where he ends up post injury. I think it was like a weird kind of ankle thing, but it's just, again, hard to see the Panthers walking away with the win, even if it is at home with the rest advantage. It's just tough.
Quarterback notwithstanding, I think Denver has the best roster in football. It's hard to find weaknesses there. And even at the positions where there's not a star like tight end or something like that, or running back, who's probably the best coach in the last 25 years at designing stuff for tight ends and running backs? It's Sean Payton, who he's not going to be calling plays, at least initially, to start the year. That was so that they could keep, I believe it was David Blau, right, as their offensive coordinator. Kind of a weird, meteoric rise there. But then they go and add Jalen Waddle, who can be their true number one receiver. It's just a really rough matchup. I know Carolina held it to only held them only to 28 points a couple years ago in Bryce Young's return from the bench, but I don't know. It's going to be a tough one, especially there is the rest advantage, but coming back from Lambeau, that's probably the worst game on the schedule you could follow it up with.
So week 10, they travel on the road to New Orleans. I was at this particular game last year. That's a really tough environment to play in. It's one that Bryce Young has never won in as a Carolina Panther. The Saints also really improved their roster this season. They added David Andrews. They added Travis Etienne. They replaced their linebacker Demario Davis with Caden Ellis. I think they had a sneaky good draft with Jordan Tyson. They added a lot of talent to their team this offseason. They solidified their offensive line, got a ton of weapons to surround their young quarterback with. The defense might be like a little bit interesting. There's a lot of older players there, but this is a Saints team that I think has really managed itself well over the past 2 off seasons. They've added a ton of talent, and like we were talking about this team as one of the bottom dwellers this past year. They turned it around towards the end of last year, and I think that they're really looking up this year. I think that they potentially could beat the Panthers in this game in New Orleans, and honestly, they might be the favorites going into this game. To be honest with you, it's going to be a tough environment. I'm pretty high on what the Saints could be doing sans their quarterback. I'm still a little bit skeptical of Tyler Shuck, but this is a team that always plays the Panthers tough. It's annoying. It is what it is. I'm not super optimistic that this is a shoe-in.
I love what the Saints did in the draft. They took all of my favorite receiving options. Tyson went, what was it, 8th overall. They drafted Bryce Lance on day 3, fun receiver, and Oscar Delp, my favorite tight end on in round 3, I think. They've improved the roster a ton. I'm a huge fan of Kellen Moore. I think he's one of the more underrated offensive minds in the league. And so I think he's going to be able to do stuff with that offense. That being said, a lot of their games last year, and I know they turned it on at the end of the season, I felt like a lot of the wins were kind of fluky. They beat the Buccaneers in what amounted to a hurricane where Baker was just terrible. The game in New Orleans against Carolina, they were driving down the field. Their kicker, I'm not sure he would have made the 60 whatever yard field goal before Tyler Shuck faked getting concussed by Lathan Ransom, who it was a questionable call on the field of it being a late hit on a sliding quarterback. But they do win that game overall. They should have won the game in Carolina. I was at that game, just an unfortunate game there. But I do think Carolina should be favored in home division games. The roster is good enough. I agree with you though that on the road things are a bit different, and this is probably historically Bryce Young's worst stadium that he's played in.
He always seems to struggle against the Saints on the road. And
It's that
moving
crowd
on to
noise
week
that they
11.
pump in.
Yeah. Dude, it is that stadium is so incredibly loud. Like you wouldn't believe it. That stadium when I went was maybe 45% full. We were sitting club level and there wasn't a person in front of us, beside us, or behind us at all throughout the entire game. And yet, that's still the loudest I've ever heard in an NFL stadium. And I was at the NFC Championship game in Charlotte in 2015. Like it's not quite up there with Carolina, Clemson, that sort of
Mhm.
rivalry, which I've been to. But if you're talking NFL environments, that's probably number one, even with it being like only a percentage full. It was nuts to be at. But moving on to week 11, the Panthers play the Baltimore Ravens November 22nd, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. The Ravens did a lot this offseason. They traded for Max Crosby, then they didn't. Then they signed Trey Hendrickson and added a few interior offensive linemen. They lost their center as well. This is a team that, in theory, should be improved. They changed their coaching staff. Now Jesse Minter is the head coach, former defensive coordinator for the LA Chargers. This is going to be a tough one. I'm on record saying that I think Lamar Jackson is just point blank the best player in the NFL. Very, very talented quarterback. It's going to be hard to beat him. He's, when this Ravens team is at their best, they're a 13, 14 win team. I know that they had a down year last year, only 8 wins, but if any team is going to turn it around from being that level of bad to potentially an elite, maybe even 1 seed, it's probably Baltimore.
I agree. I think that the addition of Mentor, they didn't even need to add anybody to that defense. Mentor alone, being a strong defensive mind, would have improved that unit. But then they also added Trey Hendrickson, who passed his prime, but he can still get after the passer when he's healthy. And then they supplemented their offensive line at the 2 guard positions. I'm curious about center because Tyler Linderbaum was important to that position, to that offensive line. And I don't blame him for taking the payday that he did. But that's like the weak point, if there is a weak point of this Ravens team, is going to be that interior offensive line. And if John Simpson, Veguane, if they've settled in at that point, but if Lamar Jackson's playing, it doesn't matter. I agree with you. I think he's QB1, even if he's not, or he wasn't necessarily healthy last year to show it. I think he's just immensely talented, and having an upgraded defense like that and a true X factor on the other side of the ball, it's going to be a tough one.
Okay. Week 12 at Tampa Bay, the third and final primetime football game. It's going to be on Monday night. We've already covered this Bucks team. I really just don't know what to make of them. It's such a weird off season from them. Um, I don't know. This game again, divisional, kind of a toss up to me, kind of similar to at New Orleans, at Atlanta. Tough environment last year. Obviously, it was the Week 18 monsoon game. Not what we wanted from the Panthers in that one, but I just think that this Bucks team has regressed quite a bit from not only last year, but if you think back to 2 years ago when Liam Cohen was the offensive coordinator, it's just gotten continually worse. They lose Mike Evans. I have to think that the Panthers are the best team in the division, and I think they'll find an away divisional win or 2 potentially.
I'm right there. We talked about how the Bucks roster has turned over the last year, the coaching staff as well. My thing about this game is that Week 18 matchup last year. I think Carolina, maybe not, they weren't in the driver's seat, but there's a real chance Carolina wins that game if a couple key calls go their way. And I know there is bias from us here, right? But the NFL landscape as a whole reacted to the point where I think everybody thought Carolina was getting a little bit shafted by the referees there with some of those calls. The out of bounds call or the offensive pass interference call, which is Mike Evans' signature move, all that kind of stuff. I think Carolina has improved a ton. And if this team is going to be a real team that deserves to win the division, this is the type of game that Carolina has to take advantage of. If the improvements are real,
Yeah,
this should be a win for Carolina.
absolutely. Do you know if this is a game that could potentially be flexed? Because it feels like Tampa, Carolina, week 12 is one that has a lot of potential to be moved out.
It could be, right? If either of the teams are like stinkers through the first 12 weeks, which I think Carolina's poor schedule to this point could reflect poorly with their record if they're losing a lot of close games against tough teams. This could definitely be a flex game, right? This isn't a, and I believe this is Thanksgiving week, if I'm not mistaken.
It
So
is.
maybe not
Yeah.
because all the good games are already on Thanksgiving and Black Friday, and there's a Thanksgiving Eve game this year for some reason on a Wednesday. Um, so maybe not. All the premier teams are already playing on the holiday weekend, but if there's a I don't know, like a Bengals something else, like Bengals Steelers, and both of those teams are competing, that could be a team that gets moved or a game that gets moved in.
Week 13, the Panthers travel to Minnesota December 6th. It's going to be a 4:30 p.m. game. The Vikings added a lot. They
Mhm.
added Kyler Murray. They added your guy Caleb Banks, who a lot of people really didn't like that pick. I know you were a lot higher on Banks. There's some injury stuff there. I actually liked the pick in the moment. What do you make of this team? I know it's one that kind of had a down year, only 9 wins compared to their. Even though it was like a 5 seed, they were like a tremendous team the year before that. What do you make of this team? Could they bounce back? Did the Panthers have a realistic shot?
I think the Panthers have a realistic shot with most of the teams this year, or at least they should if their trajectory continues. What I will say though is I am a huge believer in Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores and what they do. I think that's a top three-ish coaching tandem in the league right now. They were 9-8 with nine, we'll say, with Max Brosmer, with Carson Wentz at quarterback. I have to think Kyler Murray can give them a little bit more, even if it's not a ton more. He can give them a little bit more juice. And Kevin O'Connell's done it with Kirk Cousins. He did it with Sam Darnold, who we know Sam Darnold is now played at a franchise level. He was an outcast at the time when the Vikings brought him on, right? He was a backup to, I think, Purdy that year with the 49ers. I think he can play with any quarter or do his scheme with any quarterback. And they brought in Juwan Jennings after the draft to be their third receiver, which was a sneaky weakness for this team. If their trench work is improved, like their O line and D line, and their D line did get a lot of young talent in the draft, I think this could be another really, really good year for Minnesota. We talked about the Eagles having on and off years. Minnesota's been like that over the last 6 years, 7 years, eight
Yeah.
years now. I think over the last decade, they're one of the few teams that's won seven or more games every year. Like their lows are still pretty good relative to the rest of the league. And if you believe in their additions, I think this could be a very good team. It's also on the road. This is the Panthers' only 4 o'clock Eastern time slot game. I think this is going to be the Vikings. I think are going to be a sneaky, really good team this year.
Yeah, there's something to be said about like the weirdness of having a 4:30 kickoff when you're not used to that. It
Mhm.
really does for a lot of these elite level athletes kind of throw off their body clock when they're so used to a very specific routine. So that is something to monitor. Hopefully, it doesn't mess with Carolina too much. Week 14, they return home. It's the start of a 4-5 home stretch to end the season. They play the New Orleans Saints December 13th. This is one the Panthers should absolutely win, especially if they don't get a win earlier in the year against New Orleans.
I agree. This is a must win. To be frank, I think all the home division games are must wins, but the way that these Saints have treated Carolina over the last 5 or so years and just consistently winning, this has to be a game that you take. Like the Panthers roster, I think through and through is better than the Saints. And so when you're given a home matchup like this, even if it's a division game, you have to take advantage of that if you're going to repeat as division champs. So I like the Panthers in this one. I think this is one of the only other games that Carolina's currently favored in. according to, I think, DraftKings is what I saw a couple of days ago. So this is one that they have to take advantage of.
Another one that they're probably going to have to take advantage of is in Week 15 against the Cincinnati Bengals, December 20th, 1 p.m. game. Cincinnati had a rough year in 2025, a lot of injuries, Joe Burrow as well. They added Dexter Lawrence with basically the 10th overall pick this draft. They added Boye Mafe as well, added a lot of defensive talent in free agency. So this is one where you don't really have proof of concept yet for the Bengals defense. And Joe Burrow has pretty much every single year of his career gotten hurt at some point. So this is one where, yes, it looks like a tougher matchup right now because of the level of talent on their roster. The odds that the Bengals are as intimidating as that are a lot lower, I would say, even if it's hard to predict injuries or just overall the defense still kind of struggling to get off of a baseline 30-second team level.
Well, they were 29th in defensive EPA per play last year, so they showed some life there at the end. Dexter Lawrence isn't exactly a spring chicken either in terms of
No.
health, right? Last season he dealt with I think it was lower, or I think it was either back or lower body stuff with him. This is a talented, high-powered offense when they're firing on all cylinders. I'm never going to slander Joe Burrow. He's won me two fantasy football championships in my main league, so he's got love in my heart there. But by the time Week 15 rolls around, you just never know with this group. And the point you made about the defense being kind of an on paper defense still at this point, I think is a very good or plot point in this game, right? Even with the talent that they've added, it's still just a bunch of guys that have never played together. And the young guys still haven't shown a ton of promise so far. Miles Murphy and DJ Turner are really the only two young drafted players that the Bengals have brought in that have shown something. And even with Dexter Lawrence, Boye Mafe, Brian Cook from Kansas City, they're going to need their drafted players to play well around them.
Week 16, Carolina is traveling to Pittsburgh for their final away game. This is currently slotted to be Aaron Rodgers' final regular season home game, as he has announced that he is not going to play football after this year. So the Steelers brought Aaron Rodgers back. They added Michael Pittman, Jeremy Bernard. They did a lot in free agency and throughout the offseason. So this is a team that has seen some regression from their biggest stars on defense. TJ Watt's not the same player that he was 3 years ago. Same can be said about Cam Hayward as well. Offensively, they're kind of exciting, I think, because they added Michael Pittman and Bernard to a receiving core that already had DK Metcalf. That's pretty fun to me, even if Rodgers is probably just going to throw 70% to, I don't even know who their like scat back is going to be this year, but whoever that player is going to get, a ton of screen passes. The Steelers always seem to beat the Panthers. I'm definitely not going to dismiss that. Not only do they always seem to beat the Panthers, they always seem to beat the Panthers by 20 to 30 points. It's hard. It's a team that's always been super dominant throughout the Panthers, really franchise history at this point. On the road in Pittsburgh as well is going to be tough in December. So we'll see. The Steelers are almost certainly going to be favored leading up to that game. I think the Panthers are probably going to have to win this one, as it's one of the more manageable non-division games that they have on the schedule if they want to make the playoffs. So we'll see. I don't love the matchup, but it is what it is.
If you took the Pittsburgh Steelers name away from this one, I actually feel really good about it, honestly. Potential 44, I think, year old quarterback. That or Mason Rudolph, Will Howard, Drew Aller could be another person that plays this year. That's their QB situation. And then without Mike Tomlin, I'm really curious as to how this defense is going to be structured. Who's going to be the voice on that defense with both TJ Watt and Cam Hayward regressing? I think there are opportunities there to take advantage of. The last time Carolina played the Steelers team was in 2022, and it was during the Steve Wilkes portion of the season. And while it wasn't a blowout, it was only 24-16. That was a game that most Panthers fans thought it should be a win because Panthers were still contending for the NFC South at that point, and it was just a gut wrenching loss. I think Mason Rudolph was the starter, and Pittsburgh just ran all over Carolina. This is kind of a must win, in my opinion. Hopefully, Aaron Rodgers puts on a good show in his presumptive final home game. And I know you brought up the running backs, but we all know it's going to be Darnell Washington getting a lot of those targets. He was getting some targets down the stretch last year.
So I just looked it up. The Carolina Panthers all time are 1-7 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. The only time that they've beaten them was in 1996, which was the first time that they played them. Before that 2022 matchup that you were talking about, their previous 4 matchups against Pittsburgh from 2018 through 2006. In 06, they lost 37-3. In 2010, they lost 27-3. In 2014, they lost 37-19. That game, I think, was on Monday night, I'm pretty sure.
You don't have to say this next one.
You don't got
to say the score. Yeah.
Starts
with a 5, I think.
Week 17, or excuse me, week 17. The Panthers play against the reigning Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks at home, January 3rd, 1 p.m. Eastern. I don't love it.
And if there are any more insult to injury, the Seahawks play on Christmas the previous week, so they are at a rest advantage technically as they come across the country, because I think Christmas is a Wednesday, or it's a Friday this year. You're right. I knew it was a weird day, but rest advantage for the Super Bowl champs. It's funny. This was the exact same time that Carolina played them this past season in a game in which Carolina could have won. Darnold regressed to his former form in that one, but ultimately the team ended up losing. So I don't feel great about this one, but maybe if there's more magic, if history repeats itself, Carolina can actually take advantage of some poor Seattle play. I doubt it, though.
Week 18 against Atlanta at home. We already talked about Atlanta. It's kind of a weird team. They probably have a case to, I think, be one of the NFL teams that regresses the most this year, just because they don't have a first-round pick. They weren't able to do anything in free agency. Their quarterback's going to be returning from an ACL injury. So we'll see. I think the Panthers should be able to win this one, especially at home, it being the season closer. So, yeah, I think that this is a good matchup to end the season on.
This is the first time in quite a few years, I'm trying to think back, that Carolina has had a home finale in Week 18. Usually there's a bowl game going on at Bank of America Stadium at that point. So Carolina's been on the road a lot in Week 18, but a home game against Bryce Young's favorite opponent, division opponent, should be a good way to send this team into the playoffs if they're contending at this point.
So with that, we've talked about all 18 games on the schedule. Jacob, give us your record prediction for the Panthers after this schedule has been completed.
I'm going to refer to the article I wrote and posted on Sports CLT. My initial prediction for this team is going to be 9-8. And I know that might be a disappointment because Bryce Young has technically doubled his wins every year from 2 to 4 to 8. It won't be 16 this year. I can almost assure that. In the Dave Canales era, the team's improved by 3 wins every year so far. So fans might be looking for 10, 11 plus wins, especially with the roster improvement. But the key difference in last year and previous years is that the Panthers are playing real opponents this year. If you look across the board, the only bad team, so to speak, is Cleveland, right? And I think Cleveland's done a very good job at improving their overall roster. 9-8, I think, is a win because if you can have a positive record for the first time since 2017, which long time, almost 10 years, you can have a positive record against real competition, kind of get rid of the blowout losses and have closer losses, win the games you're supposed to win, and maybe sneak a few that you aren't, like the Green Bay game last year, the Rams game. I think that's a huge step in the right direction for a Panthers team that is still growing.
Yeah, I think that when you look at the opponents on the schedule, it's kind of scary, right? You have Baltimore, you have Minnesota, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Seattle, Denver, Green Bay, Philadelphia, Detroit, Chicago. That's a lot of really good teams. And, looking at that, it's pretty intimidating. But I do think that the Panthers got fortunate in that, A, they're going to travel the least amount of miles of any
Mhm.
NFL team this season. You have teams traveling to Australia. You have, what is it, 8 or 9 international games across the entire NFL where half of the league is going to be playing an international game at some point this year. That I mean, like it's there's a lot of teams traveling a lot of miles, and for the Panthers to be able to keep it as local as possible is, I think, a really good thing for their schedule. You also have, an early bye week going into a really tough stretch of games: Philadelphia, Tampa Bay, Green Bay, Denver. And even though it is an early bye week, it is beneficial to have that break before that certain set of games. And additionally, you do have 4 games out of the last 5 at home to end the season. So, despite the really great slate of opponents that the Panthers are scheduled to play against, I do think that they got very, very fortunate in how the schedule shook out for them. So, I do think that it is kind of a favorable draw, even if the opponents are really going to be difficult to beat. I'm right in line with you. I think 9-8 is probably exactly where I'm going to predict them. It's, you're going to have to win a lot of the divisional games, probably at least 4 or 5 of them if you want to reach that 9-win threshold. But I think that 9 wins in a season where you have to remember, if the Panthers are playing a lot of these teams, so are the other NFC South teams. Um, it's a year in which 9 wins is probably going to be enough to win you the NFC South. I think that's pretty fair to say, and to be able to grow while playing the schedule, while potentially making the playoffs anyway, I think that that in itself would be a win.
I could not agree more. The final point that I would make is, in terms of a favorable draw with Carolina, this team will have 4 preseason games, which I think is huge. Carolina's gotten off to a slow
Needed it.
start the past 2 years, and if we can get more reps for our starters, more reps in general for Brad Idzik, who's going to be calling plays for the first time this year, I think that's huge going into week 1. And despite the tough slate of opponents, most, if not all, of the really hard opponents are at home with
Yeah,
Carolina, where Carolina had a huge home field advantage last year. I think they won 6 of the 8 home games, if I'm not mistaken. The only tough road opponents, in my opinion, would be Philly. The link is always a loud environment, but you have a bye week right before that, and Philly's coming off of a London trip. Lambeau, which is always tough, but both teams are at a rest disadvantage on a Thursday. Anything can happen there. And then Minnesota, I think, is another tough one. But outside of that, you're facing all the hard teams at home.
yeah, I think that's a big point. This is a team that beat the LA Rams at home, almost did it again the second time, and like you said, they played really, really well at home, even though that road schedule isn't really, it wasn't great in
Mhm.
2025. I'm very optimistic about where the season could go for Carolina. I think it could be anywhere from, we'll say, 7 wins to maybe 10. Not the widest range. Obviously, things can go south really quickly, but I think that there's an opportunity for Carolina to grow, to take advantage of their division, and still end up in a playoff spot, despite the really, really tough schedule that they find themselves having.
For sure. And then if they build off this, then you get the AFC South next year, which
Yeah,
should be pretty nice.
hopefully, pretty
Hopefully.
nice. We'll
Hopefully.
see. Anything can change in a year, but that is going to do it for us today. Jacob, what are you working on? Where can the people find you?
You can find me at sportsclt.com. Subscribe to our Substack. Find me on Twitter at Jacob LeQuire. Going to be doing a lot of draft stuff over the summer because there's not a ton of Panthers content outside of the OTAs, which have yet to arrive. But once we get that, we can start talking about position battles and stuff like that.
Right on. You can follow me at dj.mp4. You can follow the show at Sports CLT either on Substack, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcasts. There's a ton of content over at Sports CLT. We've just been churning it out, so please subscribe over